Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. Alhamdulillah is now episode 86 of the podcast The Forward with myself, Brother Matthew Locke. And today we are going to do part two of our discussion and audio translation of the book al-Hawar fi Kitabillah, or the Etiquettes of Dialogue in the Quran, by Imam Muhammad Saeed Ramadan al-Bouti, rahimahullah ta'ala. So, before I jump into it, I just want to mention that, yes, it's been a while. It's been about 5 or 6 weeks since I last did an episode. I apologize. I was working on translating another book by Imam al-Bouti, Minhaj Tarbi Farid fil Quran, a unique pedagogical method in the Quran, which is a fascinating book, especially if you are in the field of education. And there is a lot of overlap, alhamdulillah. Now, someone left a comment and asked about publishing this book. Now, this book in particular, Adab al-Hawar, I posted a link below last time. I'll do it again here. It's only 26 pages in Arabic, and it's A5 size. It's actually a very, very short book. I intend to do it in this format of audio translation. I intend to do it in maybe 6 short episodes. But if I were to translate it as a book, it would not be long. It would be, maybe, I don't know, 20 pages, maybe 15, 20 pages in English. So I guess I can think about it. But I want to get into the topic at hand right now. So to carry on from where we left off. So we're talking about the scientific method. I talked about the definitions of science and ilm in Islam, ilm and ma'rifah, how we understand them. And the Imam is going to go over these points and expand. So the Imam's book consists, after the introduction, of 3 main points, and then some examples, and then a conclusion. So we're going to start today with point 1. So he says, as for the path that the Quran follows, it is represented in the following points. So here we are, point 1. In view of the fact that scientific or demonstrative facts, so I'm translating the word ilmi, scientific or demonstrative, meaning it can actually be shown, proven. In view of the fact that scientific or demonstrative facts are either subject to experience and observation, or they are unseen, i.e., there's no way to know them via experience and observation, the Quran speaks to us about scientific demonstrative realities. It does not present textual resolutions that are definitive by their nature, unless they are unseen matters that cannot be disclosed and examined via experience and observation, such as the realities connected to what happens after death, such as Allah telling us about resurrection and its events, or reports from the distant past. So, what's the Imam saying here? When we talk about demonstrative facts, scientific facts, they fall into 2 categories. There's that which is subject to experience and observation, i.e., can be seen, and that which is unseen. If something is seen, i.e., it is subject to experience and observation, then Allah is not going to give us a final conclusion on these matters. He's not going to give us as the Imam says, a textual resolution. Instead, He will point it out to us. He might give us an outline. He might give us a few details, but it's left to us to do our research and come to our own conclusions. So, for example, if Allah says, and this ayah is coming up, Surah Yunus, ayah 101, if Allah says, "Unzuru mada fi samawati wal ard," look at what is in the heavens and the earth, or look at what is in the skies and the earth. If we look at what's in the earth, for example, and we find bones that look like they could be dinosaur bones, we can do research. We can take that, we can say, okay, there was some sort of creature, and we can call it a triceratops, we can call it pterodactyl, we can call it Tyrannosaurus rex, or whatever. It's up to us. There's no theological pointer to be made. Oh, well, you're a kafir if you believe this, you're not a Muslim if you believe. No. These are just things that you're allowed to research. There's no final definitive conclusion about any of these things. Whereas when we're talking about matters that are of the unseen, then we have to rely on reports. We have to rely on what Allah has told us and what the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has told us, because these are trustworthy, reliable reports that are coming to us about what happens after death, what happened in the distant past, what happens on the day of judgment, and so on and so forth. So, for example, if someone says to you, we talk the simple everyday examples. If someone is telling you about something that can be verified, that someone can go and verify by themselves, they'll say, listen, this is the truth, blah, 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 blah. And then they can say, if they're very confident, they'll usually say, if you don't believe me, don't take my word for it. Go check yourself. Go look it up yourself. Go do your own research. Do your own investigation, and you'll find what I'm saying is true, right? So you want to argue about the score of a football match. You want to argue about some trivia or some statistics, and you say, no, this is what really happened. This is the number. This is the percentage. Don't take my word for it. Go look it up. Go check this website. Go check this book, and they'll go do it and they'll find it. If it's something that only one person would know, so for example, if someone tells you that this happened between me and my grandfather when I was 18 years old, we went out on a trip somewhere and such happened, and that person's grandfather has since passed away, how do you check that story? Right? This happened a long time ago. The grandfather who would be the other witness is no longer there. You can't ask him. He's passed away. What do you do? Well, then that falls back on trust, you see. That falls back on trust. And this is something we have to keep getting back into, because we're talking about, because now we just have a report. That's all we have is a report. Someone saying this happened. Do you believe it or not believe it? Well, is this person trustworthy? Is this person reliable? Does this person have a good memory? This is what we have to look at. And this is something that's very, very important in Islam, and is pretty much, or I could say completely absent in Western quote-unquote science. So, Imam al-Bouti continues. He says, do not forget what we said before, i.e., that the Quranic terminology does not distinguish between what is called ma'rifah and what is called ilm. I did talk about this in the last episode. I talked about some of the semantic differences and the grammatic differences between ma'rifah and ilm. But here it's the same thing, and the Quran is the same thing. They both comprise the aforementioned definition, which was, if you remember, إدراك الشيء على ما هو عليه بدليل منضبط بقواعد المنطق وأصوله. Right? So it is understanding or grasping something as it truly is, with evidence that is governed by or regulated by or in accordance with the rules and principles of logic. Okay? So, and again, like I said before in the last episode, this definition of ours, of ilm, because again, we don't have a word for science. Science is knowledge. It's the same thing. This excludes scientific hypotheses and theories. That's all in the realm of research. Again, you have to be careful. This is what's happening now. Well, not now. I would say in the West, they do this repeatedly. They put out research. They put out stuff that's still being tested, stuff that's still being investigated, and then they want you to accept it. They want the general public to accept it as, oh, it's just 100% fact. It's established, it's proven, it's demonstrable, it's been measured, it's done. End of story. Whereas the reality is, no, these are still theories. They're still being tested, they're still being investigated. And that's why they have these expressions that say stuff, oh, but the science is evolving. Well, if it's evolving, it's not science. If your position is constantly evolving, well, we think it's this, oh, but then we think it's this. Oh, we think this medicine works. Oh, wait, it's not as effective. Oh, we think the mask works. Oh, it doesn't really work. Oh, we think this is a variant. Oh, it might not be a variant. Oh, we think it's deadly. Oh, maybe it's not so deadly. But you, as a quote-unquote non-scientist, you're just supposed to accept everything they're saying as absolute 100% truth. And to give you an example of something that you can go look up yourself, go look up, all right, this idea of these quote-unquote doctors and scientists having absolute authority and they should never be questioned. Look up things that doctors have endorsed in the past, okay? Don't take my word for it. Go look up doctors endorsing cigarettes. That's an example of something that is subject to experience and observation. Go look that up. Go look up doctors endorsing cigarettes, because they used to. So don't always assume that what doctors are telling you is absolute truth and will never change and is definitely a good thing that they're telling you to do. Okay? Bear that in mind. Now, the other thing I want to say here about reports, because again, this is what Imam al-Bouti says next. He says, therefore, if unseen matters can be understood as they truly are, with demonstrative scientific evidences that are appropriate for them, they are then classified as established unseen realities. Now, what is he getting at? He's talking about reports. He's talking about reports. So we have that method. And that article on my blog, which I'll give you the link to, The Scientific Method for Researching Truth, which is the opening chapter of his book, Kubra al-Yaqiniyat al-Kawniyya, The Greatest Universal Sureties, explains our method, because we have in Islam, we have the sciences of Mustalahat al-Hadith, we have Ilm al-Rijal, we have al-Jarh wa Ta'adil. We have these sciences where we can look at a chain of transmission, we can look at who made the original statement, and then who did it pass through, who are all these narrators. Are they all reliable? Are they all trustworthy? And then we can grade it. This is Sahih, this is Hasan, this is Da'if, this is Mawdu', right? This is authentic, this is merely good, right? Which is quite close to authentic. This is Da'if, this is weak, so it's questionable. And then there's stuff that's just outright fabricated. We can tell this outright fabricated. So just to give you a quote from this article, Imam al-Bouti says himself, he says here, when he explains all these methods that the Muslims have about checking reports, checking narrations, he says, the method of research according to Westerners. We will conclude the discussion of ours by following the same path that we started out on, and thus we ask, what is the scientific method that Western thought follows in all the various sciences that it comes across? There is no escape from going back and dividing the subject of science, whatever its type, into two sides. A report that needs to be verified, and a claim whose veracity needs to be ascertained. Right? Again, this is the same thing we're talking about here. If you have a claim whose veracity needs to be ascertained, that goes back to tangible matters. That goes back to that which is subject to observation and experience. Right? So, like for example, I just said to you a few minutes ago, I said that doctors in the West used to endorse cigarettes. That's a claim I've just given you. You can go ahead and look that up. That's for you. But then we have a report that needs to be verified. That's the other side of it. We have a report that needs to be verified. So he says we'll start with the first of them, i.e. these reports. And he says the method of testing transmissions and reports. Imam al-Bouti says, we do not need to exert much thought in reflecting on the answer, for the reality is that the Western method is devoid until now of any objective standard for verifying anything connected to narrations and transmissions. Okay? Maybe I'll say that one more time. He says, we do not need to exert much thought in reflecting on the answer, for the reality is that the Western method is devoid until now of any objective standard for verifying anything connected to narrations and transmissions. So if you reflect on that, you have to understand this is why in Western academia, in their scholastic tradition, they have such a hard time understanding the Hadith sciences, and they have such a hard time understanding the Quran, how the Quran was transmitted, how the Quran reached so many people. Why is it the same Quran in Morocco and Indonesia, all around the world? They have such a hard time grasping this. Oral transmission from trustworthy narrator to trustworthy narrator. They have such a hard time grasping this. Because for them it's like, well, if it's not written, it doesn't exist. Right? They can't understand how something can be written down. That's why they try to cast doubts about where the Quran came from. Well, it didn't really exist until after the Prophet's death. Right? Or that the Hadith didn't really exist until centuries later when they were written down. These are silly arguments because they don't get it. They simply, like this idea of mass transmission or verifying reports, stuff being reported orally. I said that mass transmission there because, again, we have this concept of mutawatir. We have this understanding of mutawatir, which they don't have. They would probably recognize it, but they don't have it. So this example of something being mutawatir is we say that something has been transmitted by so many different chains of transmission that it's just impossible, it's inconceivable that all these people would come together and conspire to lie, or that they've done so. So the example I give, often when I'm teaching is I say, okay, I myself, Mahdi Locke, I've never been to Thailand. However, I know people who claim to have been from there. I went to school with people who said they were from there. I know people to this day who claim they're from there. I've taught students at universities who claim to be from there. If I crack open the Times Atlas of the World, It's there. It's listed. There's a country in Southeast Asia called Thailand, like Bangkok. If I go to an airport, there's this airline called Thai Airlines, and it claims that it does flights to the city. If I go on Google or do these searches, it's there. If I go check out international sporting events, there are athletes from this country claiming they represent this place called Thailand, and so on and so forth. Is it conceivable that all these people are conspiring to produce this lie of a land called Thailand? No, it just does not make any sense. That's inconceivable. That's our understanding of tawatur. That's how we see. So the Quran is mutawatir. It's reached us through so many chains of transmission that it's impossible to be a lie. It's impossible to be a fabrication. It's revelation from Allah. It's absolutely trustworthy. And therefore, what we're told in there, in the Quran, about unseen matters, about angels, about jinn, about Yawm al-Qiyamah, about what happens after death, we believe it. Because it's come from an absolutely trustworthy source. It's come from Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, from Jibreel, from Allah himself. That's it. End of story. End of story. And this is something that Westerners in their so-called scientific mindset cannot grasp. It's really, really hard for them, or I would say just beyond their reach. Imam al-Bouti continues. He says, as for something that can be known via experience and observation, i.e. material matters that are subject to investigation, the Quranic method is to talk about it and identify it without presenting any definitive scientific or demonstrative resolution regarding it. If it had done that, if Allah had done that in the Quran, it would be incumbent upon people to believe in what it affirms in and of itself, and thus it would be making intellects take on scientific facts connected to tangible and observable matters without their coming to know about them via the evidences that are appropriate for them, which is the means of experience and observation. Okay, and this is something you can think about. Like if we're talking about, again, like dinosaurs, Allah hasn't given us a definitive answer on dinosaurs. Allah has just said, look at what's in the skies and the earth. Come to your own conclusions. This does not have any impact on your theology. You believe what you want to believe. And I've given that example before as well about how, if you're talking about something that happened between you and your grandfather several years ago, and your grandfather's no longer alive. So how do people believe you? How do people check it? Well, they have to take your word for it. They have to ask, okay, well, are you a trustworthy person? Whereas if it's something that is subject to tajriba and mushahada, experience and observation, i.e. it's a claim whose veracity needs to be ascertained, or what I mean by that is it can be ascertained. You can go and you investigate and check. Then that's what we let people do. So one of the points, for example, that Imam al-Bouti makes in his book, Minhaj Farid, the book I just finished translating, is he says if you're a teacher and your student, you want to teach your student something, but your student can actually learn that thing, learn that fact via experience and observation, then you let them do so. You don't force them to take your word for it. So you might say, instead of saying to your student, listen, oil and water don't mix, shut up, believe me. You might say to them instead, listen, take that oil, take that water, put it together in one container, shake it up and see what happens. Ooh, look, they separate. Okay, what conclusion do you draw from that? Oil and water don't mix. Good. So Imam al-Bouti continues, and he says, the Quran does not make anyone do this out of reverence for their intellects, and to push them, that's why Allah does this, to push them to discover tangible material realities according to their logical method for which there is no alternative, and that is experience and observation. Reflect on the following passages, how they contain a call to researchers and thinkers to discover the laws of space and celestial bodies, the system of the earth and its movements, to discover the inside of the human body, and so on and so forth. Look at how it pushes them to use their intellectual and material means to arrive at scientific demonstrative facts that are established by themselves without settling therein upon any final decision. So, for example, we have Surah Yunus, the 10th chapter, verse 101. Allah says, say. The translation is, say, look at what is in the skies and on earth. Likewise, in Surah Al-Dhariyat, the 51st chapter, ayat 20, Allah says, there are certainly signs in the earth for people with certainty, and in yourselves as well. Do you not then see? Furthermore, Surah Al-Anbiya, the 21st chapter, verse 32. We have made the sky a preserved and protected roof, yet still they turn away from our signs. Followed by Surah Yusuf, the 12th chapter, 105. How many signs are there in the skies and earth, yet they pass them by, turning away from them? As you can see, Imam al-Bouti comments, he says, as you can see, Allah does not go further in his dialogue with them when speaking about material matters. He does not go further than encouraging those of intellect and investigation to do research using their scientific tools of discovery in order to arrive at their reality and to know their innermost nature. At the same time, it goes into detail regarding unseen matters, for which there is no way for the senses to comprehend, and presents them decisively and firmly. This is because there is no way to acquire knowledge of these matters via the means of experience and observation. The only scientific way is via the reports of the Maker and the Creator, and He is Allah Azza wa Jal. He is Allah, Mighty Majestic. So, alhamdulillah, that concludes part 2 of our series in this book. And I hope that's clear. I hope that makes sense. And I hope people can understand now that we have these two kinds of scientific fact. We have that which is subject to observation and experience, and that which is unseen. And we have our methods for both. In Islam, we have our methods for both. But in the West, they do not have any method for verifying reports and transmissions. They have no method. So you have to bear that in mind. So again, please go back and read the article, The Scientific Method of Researching Truth. And inshallah, I will produce a part 3 to this series very, very soon, inshallah. And with Allah alone, it's every success. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.